Hey everybody, it's Amy Head at New Perspectives for Life. It is time for our micro-minute strategy. We are looking at strategies that can help us with our mental health, with our perspective, with our mindset, success, all kinds of things. Once a day, every day for the entire year. 1 minute a day will make all these massive changes for us. And today we are on day 8. It is January 8th, so this is our day 8 micro-minute strategy. And we're going to focus today on expectations. A lot of times we have expectations of others, of ourselves, and often we get let down, or we get frustrated, or we get aggravated, disappointed, discouraged. And we want to kind of look at that because we don't want to go through another year in our relationships feeling that way. And a lot of times when we have these expectations of others, let's say, we have those expectations because we believe they should be behaving differently, or they can behave differently, or they should be making changes in their lives, or interacting in a different way, or managing something in their life better. And we have these expectations, but they never seem to live up to these expectations. And then we continue to have the same expectations, expecting something different, and it often doesn't happen. And that leaves us feeling frustrated and all the things that I already mentioned. So a great micro-minute strategy to use for this is to think about ahead of time, what is it that you're wanting to accomplish by having this expectation of somebody else or of yourself? It can actually be of yourself. Maybe you've made these New Year's resolutions, or you have these commitments that you've made, and you want to, procrastinate less, or you want to be better about decluttering your house, or being on time, or whatever it is. And you know that generally you aren't those things, but you place this expectation on yourself to be that thing. And it almost feels like it sets you up for disappointment and for sabotage and for a lack of success. So we want to kind of look at, why do we have the expectations that we have? And is it really worth considering maybe something different, especially when we're thinking about expectations we have of others? So the micro-minute strategy is going to be to ask yourself a question before you decide to commit to the expectation that you have. And the question that you want to ask yourself, and this is the minute, you're going to ask yourself this question, and then you're going to take a minute to think about the question, about the answer, about your answer to this question. And it may take longer than a minute to really process it if this is the first time you're thinking about it, but just giving the brain 1 minute to focus on the answer to this question that we're getting ready to ask, can be a whole world changer for you in terms of how you're going to go into an interaction with somebody else, how you're going to view yourself, and where that is going to lead. So the question you want to ask yourself, and you can set your timer, and then you can ask yourself this question, and then you're going to sit with it and just sort of meditate, think on it for the 1 minute. The question is this: is the expectation I have of this other person, or is the expectation I have of me reasonable? Now, that's the question, but I want to put a couple of caveats in there. In your mind, you probably think it's reasonable because it just seems like a reasonable thing to ask or expect of someone or of yourself. So on the front end, it looks like it would be reasonable automatically, so it kind of seems like a silly question. But what you want to think about is it reasonable to the pattern of that person? Is it reasonable to the pattern of me? So the question becomes, is my expectation of this person or of me reasonable to the pattern or the process of that person or of myself? When you think about that, it kind of gives a different slant on the whole thing about expectations, because even if we think it's reasonable, if we know that our expectation is not reasonable to the other person or to our pattern or process, then we're already setting ourselves up for disappointment, because we're basically expecting something that just isn't going to happen. Now, does that mean it never could happen? No, but that's different than an expectation. That's something that's maybe something that could be worked on. But if I expect my colleague to be open-minded with my feedback that I'm going to give my colleague, and they generally are never open-minded and they take things very personally and they don't see that they do anything wrong, why would I go in expecting them to be open when that's not their pattern or process? Okay. So the question you want to ask, and this is your micro minute, turn your timer on. And anytime you're getting ready to have an expectation about somebody else or yourself, ask the question, is my expectation reasonable to the pattern and or the process of that person? And then just sit with that question. Think about past history, think about the pattern and the process of the person. And if the answer is yes, then you probably want to go ahead and move forward with that expectation. If the answer is no, or not really, or it never has been reasonable to their pattern or process, then it's probably a good idea to look at adjusting the expectation. That doesn't mean letting the person off the hook. It actually kind of means letting you off the hook, because then you're going to be less disappointed, less frustrated, and that's a good thing for you. Okay. If you have questions about this or comments or feedback, drop them below or shoot me a message. I would love to have more conversation about this with you, because it's so important and it's so empowering to not feel like we are being managed by our own expectations of self or others that just really aren't reasonable to that pattern or to that process. All right, guys, that's our micro minute for today. And I hope that's helpful, and we'll see you tomorrow.